The power of defeated giants infuses this plate. A phrase stated throughout Pokemon engraved within a plate of Arceus. Despite Arceus defeating these giants after being born, we never see these titans. Yet parts of them continue to live on despite their loss to the great original one. Pieces of the original dragon. Universes empowered by the light of Ultra Necrozma, and even the only Pokemon to share the exact category of gigantic Pokemon with Regigigas, as we have Eternatus, a creature whose body represents no more than a single hand from a greater unknown being fallen to our planet. Who were these giants? What powers did they have? And why did Arceus kill them? Howdy there, I'm Krillic, and we have another story from Boltoy. I could not resist, as this is the follow-up to the previous one. If I call him Boltoy, bear with me, as that's how I met them. I've not pre-read this, and as we get into it, please be sure to follow him on Medium, where he posts these articles free for everyone. Again, I will be reading this for the first time here, and I will add in plenty of my own thoughts as we go along, and I'm very excited for this one. So let's begin with Kiskeym's preamble to this story. I don't exaggerate when I say the defeated giants are a bit of a fixation of mine, so crucial to the world building and yet so ignored by the game's own writing. It is easy to even miss their existence entirely. In the course of my analysis, I always struggled with how to properly portray my conclusions on their identity, fragmented as they are through multiple titles. By prefacing cosmology and prehistory sections to those of the specific regions, I hope I reached a satisfactory compromise. In my personal opinion, Boltoy has. To some, many assertions discussed in this article may invade the territory of speculation too much. Now, I don't blame them. The general picture that could be inferred is coherent with all the established mythos, but also requires a leap of faith in the game's writing in the absence of more solid evidence to some claims. It goes without saying that this work is unfinished by its own nature, as at any moment new info can shed new light on dark corners of the narrative, recontextualizing old suggestions or expanding on the setting. Thus, I invite you to read it with an open mind and not without a good dose of sane skepticism. With Boltoy's preamble out of the way, we begin with a chapter called A Time Forgotten. As previously discussed in long detail, giants played a crucial role in the cosmogony, despite the text on the flame plate being their only explicit mention through the whole franchise. Overlooking their troubled history and development, the picture we can infer in the finalized canon is for these creatures to have emerged in a young universe, before the Earth was formed, as first byproducts of the seeds of life sprouting on different planets. As they were tainted by chaos, giants grew to embody aspects of reality yet to be divided from the original turmoil, namely the Pokemon typings, with the exception of normal under Arceus' jurisdiction. Soon enough, these beings waged war against creation, sought to nullify disparity and a great singularity once more, and they were promptly stopped and stripped of their powers by the forces of the original one and its Rage Incarnate. The Rage Incarnate being mentioned is Giratina. Later titles are cautious in expanding this myth, while only silently building up its foundations. With how much the script has been revised in this particular point, it is to be expected that developers are less prone to embrace all its implications, especially with how little familiar players may be with it. Still, all the new additions to the setting must be coherent with the rules established beforehand, which is why, in the lack of a clear cohesiveness in their world building in relation to their predecessors, Generation 5 to Generation 7 were harder to frame in the broader picture without heavy assumptions. With Pokemon Sword and Shield, it finally came to the confirmation of a previous inference. Much like Regigigas on Earth, at least another gigantic Pokemon, quote-unquote, existed in outer space. While Eternatus' category differs from the colossal Pokemon in the English localization, the two are actually one and the same. Only the Galar legendary Pokemon has its nomenclature written in katakana, the syllabus usually used to transcribe foreign language words into Japanese to stress its otherworldly nature. If Eternatus is one of the defeated giants, or at least a husk of its former self, then we can work backwards to identify similar creatures across different titles. This way, the hidden scenario of the previous games becomes more apparent as we notice a recurring motif in many legendary Pokemon
without a clear position in the setting. In the case of Eternatus, we have a particularly strong extraterrestrial creature, partially dragon type, capable of disrupting space-time, and that embodies a certain quote-unquote power at the base of its generation's battle gimmick, which shows to be predisposed to crystallization and reacts peculiarly to flora. Almost all of these characteristics are also found in both the original dragon. Hold on, what? Boltoy says flora. I assume he means fauna because all of the Pokemon would then be fauna, but I'm not sure there. But already we're seeing a lot of these themes that he had talked about before, which involved the idea of Regigigas, again, being this giant that was either born on this planet, while Eternatus was likely born on a different planet. And we know that it was defeated, though when it was defeated and sent down to Earth, we question on whether or not it's actually its full body or not, with all of its pieces going out, especially during the darkest day, for it to then lose its Eternamax form and just becoming Eternatus as it slumbered. Eventually, it would get all of its powers back, become Eternamax, create another Darkest Day, and have this almost infinite power that it does have inside of it. So then, who's to say that even this is at its maximum power, much like a certain couple of other dragons we're going to talk about very soon, from what I see in Voltoy's script. Almost all these characteristics are also found in both the original dragon from Generation 5 and in Necrozma from Generation 7. While we never see the beings ruling over these energies, Mega Evolution in Generation 6 and Terrestrialization in Generation 9 also follow the same pattern. Accepting all these forces as related to giants helps to recontextualize much of the information given in their respective settings, suddenly shifting from concepts without concrete ties to the established cosmology, to natural follow-ups to some of its more obscure passages. This isn't to say that entities like the original dragon and Necrozma are giants through and through. Most of early drafts from Diamond and Pearl insist that these spawns are hardly to consider Pokemon to begin with, due to their relation with chaos, and the ones we see don't even necessarily bear the same relation with their respective titan. Some may be mere remnants of giants now mutilated beyond recognition. Others may have developed consciousness as fragments of a greater whole. Again, going into this idea of maybe Eternatus or Necrozma, even in their quote-unquote full power, are still just pieces of a much more powerful being that either doesn't exist anymore or is shattered. Much like how Arceus is just a fragment of a greater being, or rather a created avatar of the greater being that is the original one. It cannot be even ruled out that some pre-existing entities may have taken control of giants' bodies, much like what we see with the creation trio. We will conventionally refer to the creatures described above as gods of power to distinguish them from the gods of creation, namely Arceus, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, who also manifest in the physical world through bodies of giants, or in the case of Arceus, its own body as the alpha Pokemon. This distinction is merely functional. Regardless of the exact relation with the original giants, the gods of power still retain a close resemblance to their original selves, carrying their chaotic energies as their living embodiments. On the other hand, the creation trio is simply using giants' carcasses as vessels to interact with the material plane, but most of their former identities have been completely overruled by their hosts. Orbs associated with the three could still result from the same process of crystallization seen in their cousins, and it can be argued that the Tree of Life is none other than their form of communication with Flora. Oh, okay, Boltoy did mean Flora. I was wrong to doubt him. But everything from the powers they were supposed to irradiate to the specifics of their homeworlds remains completely in the dark. One thing that should be noted, however, is that the time frame between the birth of the giants and their rebellion against the original one is never specified. Right off the bat, one may be induced to think the two to almost being concurrent, but as we'll see, evidences point out to types being shared between the different planets as if a web of relations existed between the various factions, and that included the alpha Pokemon too. After all, chaos could seep in their minds as giants were born far from Arceus' influence. Imagine it like the closer you are to Arceus, the more you are likely to agree with Arceus, be one with Arceus. Because even when you look at the old scripts, or the old verses rather, it says that Arceus is everywhere but nowhere. Its power is in everything, but is not in anything at all. Though if you're far enough away from it, then you are away from that power, away from its reach, away from that same mindset that it holds, and that's where the giants come from. But it would be absurd for the deity to leave their planets unchecked without any backup plan in the case one seed of life went rogue for whatever reason. Much like how we've seen with Palkia's rebellion, it is much more likely that the chaotic acolytes would wait for the right moment to strike their blow, pretending to play along in the meanwhile. That being the case, billions of years before the Earth came to be, the universe may have seen the dawn and the dusk of an age of giants, where life thrived on their worlds of origin as they took an increasingly relevant role in the pantheon. I can already see this working, because when we think of alien Pokemon, when we think of like Clefairy, you think of Staryu, Starmie, especially with Starmie's Mega Evolution, which is not a part of this script whatsoever. We know Starmie is coming down to our planet, or the Pokemon's Earth, whatever you want to say, to assimilate, to look more like humans. It sits in front of the Counterlove Library in Sinnoh, and then it sits in the electric solar place that is in Sinnoh as well, being great places for it to get information and then send information through clear skies as it learns more and more about humanity. So what's to say the same wasn't happening regarding all the other aliens of the Pokemon world, and they could have been rather envoys of these other planets where these seeds of life were dropped down and these giants existed. In fact, the importance of the energies of types in how the universe is structured shouldn't be ignored. Many of these powers are linked to a specific substrate from which they can be hardly split on a conceptual level. For example, water type can difficultly exist in a world devoid of water, but in the context of a fantasy setting, the opposite may be true as well. That being the case, the gift of the giants helped to shape an early universe down to its fundamentals. Arceus must have noticed these were externalizations of chaos still left in the turmoil, but to distinguish its many components was its will from the beginning. Allowing their spread, then, was in accord to its design. Even if the world was filled with matter due to Dialga and Palkia's prayer, and the spirit was stripped from its original seat as the Lake Trio was generated, the scenery that unfolded couldn't be a welcoming one. A dark void of directionless particles was not the fit environment for individuals to exist, and that direction couldn't be imparted by Arceus' soul essence, that is, the normal type. While still its own elemental energy, normal type Pokemon usually feature a more regular anatomy compared to creatures we may perceive as fantastical from a real-world perspective. Indeed, when not mixed with another attribute, most of these Pokemon appear to just be mammals, which is expected when its ruler also comes with a similar body type. I mean, it's a big old alpaca llama looking thing, right? Well, in fact, it would be more apt to call it a horse, but that's a whole different conversation, not part of Boltoy's whole article here. Granted, there are exceptions because this was the essence existing before others contaminated the world. Normal also doubles down as a neutral type, as well as displayed in artificial or amorphous Pokemon like Porygon and Castform. Moves under its label tend to be physical, often resorting to direct contact. But even outside signature moves, there are cases in which normalcy is molded as one or more energy projectiles. Swift and Hyper Beam are some examples. Arceus' Judgment is another. Moreover, normal type is strictly related to sound, with most of the moves referring to music. Sing, Parasong, Relic Song, Heal Bell, Round, Roars, Growl, Roar, Uproar, Noble Roar, Howl and Screech, Sonic Waves, Supersonic, Boom Burst, Echoed Voice, Hyper Voice, or simply Voice in general, Confide, all falling under this category. The semantic field of quote-unquote sleep is also, or usually, incorporated here, with attacks like Snore, Sleep Talk, and Yawn. Thematically, this makes sense as the original one is deeply associated with the idea of words. The mechanism it brought concepts to the world that of writing their essences through phonetic symbols. Indeed, we can only imagine then the first unknown Arceus shaped the universe with to have also been normal type before Psychic was incorporated into their code. I've never thought of it that way. That what if because Arceus is the normal type and it was creating everything, normal Pokemon would have been the first to be created, especially because the power of the plates wasn't imbued into other Pokemon just yet. And once that was done, they were transferred into these Pokemon to grant them new powers, new abilities, new forms, and the unknown changed from the literal code of the universe and may still be there, the original normal type, but that the psychic unknown now exist in common day. They exist for us to actually see and document as early as the Hisuian days as we are currently aware of. Still, signifiers alone cannot build a world in the lack of their meanings. For creatures to spread and multiply, at the very least, they required a stage. Given the dragon type is shared among all known giants' bodies, the one currently inhabited by Dialga must have originally been the ruler of steel type. This is the elemental force running through metals, not necessarily steel specifically, although it is possible for the alloy of carbon and iron to form spontaneously in this setting, contrary to its real-life counterpart. From a cosmological perspective, metals must have existed in the forms of atoms in the moment Dialga and Palkia prayed for them, meaning what this giant actualized wasn't the substance itself. Rather, for energy to flow through metals, it was required that they combined into a larger mass. Then, perhaps, the giant might have been the basis for their aggregation, electrons flowing through a sea of ions in a metallic bond. Steel-type Pokemon are predominantly defensive. Their impenetrable armors are not easily scratched even by the same metals, let alone by the ordinary normal type. For this reason, its giant may have been a particularly strong opponent to face during the war. Moves of this typing are usually physical, although bursts like Flash Cannon, Mirror Shot, and Steel Beam can be performed by many. If the secret of their strength indeed runs on their peculiar arrangement on a molecular level, then it raises the question of its world of origin. On one hand, this differentiates the type from similar energies related to the solid state of matter, such as rock and ground, which would come to embody different chemical bonds, but that only adds to the mystery of how all their planets came to be in the absence of a rule aggregating their masses. In particular, metals usually represent a major component of planets' cores. Then, it is possible for this kind of giant to be primordial, even compared to most of their comrades. Maybe, in other words, some seeds of life managed to sprout inside great clouds of particles before they all deposited into solid shells. That some types may have emerged before others is evidenced by the different role they play as elemental forces. For example, while water type is fundamental to life, it isn't for the formation of a celestial body, meaning we can safely place the birth of its ruler after that of the steel, rock, and ground counterparts. So effectively, that would basically mean, hey, you need a steel or molten metal core, that has to come first. So the steel typing had to come first. Then, eventually, we would get other typings that would be added in other planets in later times, but it always has to start with what's most necessary. This didn't undermine its success. Water is currently the most common type among all discovered Pokemon. Those that are able to master this element are extremely diverse in their approach to battle. Despite the type being originally classified as a special one, many employ water as a liquid coat to reinforce their strikes, while others prefer expelling it at high pressure to hit the target at a distance. Physical versus special moves. Status moves like Aqua Ring and Life Dew even manage to draw healing properties from the medium. Due to its fluid state, water-type attacks tend to amalgamate with other sources, rendering the moves not very effective against foes of the same typing. Moreover, steel attacks also fall flat against marine creatures, other water types, perhaps as a nod to the corrosion metals may undergo after being exposed to water for long periods of time. In any case, the evolutionary supremacy of this element can be easily explained with its necessity for most living creatures. Both Archie and a minor NPC in Alola remark how life all came from the sea, and while this assertion requires further elaboration when it comes to Earth, it can be at the very least concluded that the element is essential for organisms to emerge from the primordial soup. which this would not only play into the game, but also the anime where the waters of life have all come from, I believe, Shimodi Islands. Water does bear a connotation of a purifying agent both for the body and the spirit in Japanese sensibility, and fantasy settings often portray it as a medium between the physical and the metaphysical. Even in the early drafts from Diamond and Pearl, the original one transferred the essences of Aya and Ea to the bodies of giants by pouring its blood, the liquid component of oneself, into their mutilated corpses. That being said, the Giant of Water, currently used by Palkia as a vessel, may have externalized a power to rule over this substance, spilling it over its own planet and those of its brethren so that life forms other than their main incarnations could develop on their surface. So they had to cover their planet, or rather this water giant covered the planet itself, so that way it could effectively spread life, so that it effectively could create more life with its own power, and it still serves itself as that seed of life for this other planet far away from Arceus. One aspect that may instead precede the Giant of Steel and others of its kind is the Ghost type, the power serving as the basis for souls. These are conceptually different from the spirit we're familiar with, as the latter concerns the sphere of consciousness and self-awareness that allows the individual to exist on their own and to perceive the world around them, while the former is the element that animates the body in the physical plane. Ghost-type Pokemon are usually stranded souls that are able to manifest in the material world. I think of Yamask immediately, often using a medium as a substitute for their flesh and bones. Other times, the attribute is given to Pokemon with the ability to manipulate souls of others. That would be a really good example of Dusknoir, Dusclops Dusknoir, yep, and then also the idea of Hisuian Typhlosion, or otherwise with a strong affinity with the world of the occult. Formerly classified as a physical type, now its members even slightly lean toward excelling in special attacks. As their essences exist on a different dimension, elemental energies that are too grounded in matter have no effect on ghost-type Pokemon. This is also exemplified within the Pokemon Adventures manga, where even if you are a grass-type, you are not hitting a ghost-type Pokemon. You are too much in the physical world, so grass-type moves aren't hitting, water-type moves aren't hitting, fire doesn't matter, and of course normal still doesn't, amongst other moves, until eventually it was kind of not explained directly, but you have to understand that ghost types are a different class of creature, something else entirely that does and doesn't exist in a weird way. And again, they never fully explain that when they first bring up that topic in the manga. While ghost type moves are shown to be particularly strong against their own kind, while phasing through Pokemon with the more mundane attributes. This is the case of normal, which also means the fight between Arceus and the Giant of Ghost, being still Kiskeym or something else in the finalized canon we're unaware of, would result in a stalemate if not for the latter's dragon typing. Then, for the odds to turn into Arceus and Giratina's favor, their battle must have took place only at a later stage in the war, when the deity already absorbed at least one other energy from the enemy army. The Giant of Ghost may have been the one to bring forth the concept of souls into the world, and that requires some clarification. First, this doesn't necessarily mean it also ruled over death. The cycle of life is not an inherent consequence of a metaphysical substrate. That, two big words, effectively, just because you live doesn't mean you have to die, or just because you represent life doesn't mean you have to represent death, and more appropriate entities will later emerge to keep its balance in check. If anything, Kiskeym is the only giant who seems to be able to elude death due to its typing. Secondly, it is possible a proper quote-unquote soul was conceptualized for the creation trio in the moments they took over their current bodies, as they needed to dominate their flesh in the physical world. Before, talking about them in terms other than spirit may be misleading, and the same goes for the original one, the primordial unknown and the first seeds of life. Perhaps other giants may have originally functioned more mechanically, in absence of a soul, basically acting like robots. They have to do this in order to get this, but they don't care why. But its role is so central that the Giant of Ghost may have simply been among the first to be created. The problem of its planet's composition before chemical bonds were actualized doesn't arise, as it may have been composed of the same ethereal matter of ghosts, an incorporeal celestial body from which souls were pumped out before other trees of life regulated their course. In other words, we're centralizing the idea of the soul having to exist in order for all of these other ideas to begin to exist. You have to have a soul within these giants of steel, these giants of water, these giants of everything else, for them to want a purpose, for them to commit to a purpose, for them to want to rebel against Arceus, and then you can have these creatures be created, thus effectively making the giant of ghost typing, the Regigigas, if you would, for lack of a better term, be the first giant. In that sense, the giants of steel, ghost, and water always acted as a trio to embodying the body, the soul, and the link between them. In fact, it may be questioned why Arceus chose them as the vessels for the creation trio specifically. Were they closely collaborating as its servants even before the war? That would make sense from a logistical standpoint. To create the stage for even more seeds of life to thrive, first a solid bedrock was required for the roots to take over, then water had to be poured to make the plant grow and generate the primordial soup in which life would develop, and finally the newly arisen organisms were given souls so that way their bodies could act accordingly to their spirits. That reminds me of creating a golem of sorts, much like Golurk. You have this giant automaton, this creature of ground and ghost that just exists in Pokemon. Its energy is infinite, but it does have a spirit or soul or thought process to it. But in order for that to be contained, you have to build it a body, something that its mega form does exemplify, as it's struggling not to explode due to the sheer amount of energy that it has. And when you look at its body, it looks like it's clawing at itself, like it's trying to hold on to make sure that its body doesn't explode, using some of the energy it has, this excess of energy, to hold itself together, to keep its purpose. It's a golem given life, and that is what's happening from the giant of ghost, giving essence and life to these bodies that have been created. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. Please make sure you do subscribe to the channel, as there's weekly content released all the time. And I've got to finish off the rest of the gallery ecology, because those wild zones aren't going to take care of themselves, and no other YouTube's going to do it either, as I just love ecology as a whole and have to take these side tangents through lore. Also, leave a comment on any of the thoughts that you have as I go through this. I know that Kiskeym would love to read them. I know I'm excited to read them. Plus, comments make sure that the video gets boosted alongside watch time, and of course sharing the video directly. If you'd like to support the channel by going the extra mile, become a member for as little as $3 a month, get behind the scenes info, my insane ramblings, and your name in the credits, amongst a number of other things. I also have a secondary channel you can go check out just for short videos that I've just started getting through, and I'm excited to be working on those as well. Keep your eyes out for a very special announcement that I will be doing soon, but enough of that. Once again, thank you for watching, and on with the video. Winter's Spiral. Nowhere is this collaboration more evident than with the Ice type, peculiarly representing a different state of matter of a pre-existing typology. It is still its own independent energy compared to water, borrowing its solid composition from other crystalline attributes. Indeed, Ice struggles in dealing damage to itself. Water and Steel type, whose attacks are also capable of effectively striking through their defenses at ease, likely due to their higher hardness. While the type was formerly classified as special, many of its moves involve throwing solid ice at the opponent rather than blasting energy at a distance. I'm sorry, I just imagine grabbing a handful of like freezer ice and just launching it at somebody. One of those ice-filled snowballs, which are pretty horrible. Additionally, moves like Haze and Mist are not even strictly associated with its solid state, focusing more on low temperature vapor, possibly mixed with other gases. In other words, Ice type can be more broadly described as the energy that manipulates water by triggering its phase transitions from liquid to solid. It is undeniably connected to water even as an attribute, the move Freeze Dry being super effective against Pokemon bearing the type by lowering the target's temperature based on the homonymous, I've never seen that word before, process for dehydration. As a concept, it must have surely emerged after the formation of chemical bonds on top of the liquid itself. But maybe what this giant brought forth to the world was the ability for those bonds to change under specific conditions. That of change is indeed a trait we can find in the creature that mostly embodies the true nature of this giant. And if this is going into Kyurem, I'm gonna find a shiny ball toy and name it Kiskeym. Legends in the Unova region tell of a dragon who eventually split in two, leaving a third shell behind. Progressing through the games, it becomes clear the pair of beings to be the legendary Pokemon Reshiram and Zekrom, while the husk is none other than Kyurem, or Kyurem as it should be stated, as attested by the lore passed down in Opelucid City. This notion has led some fans to confusion, as folklore in Lakanosa Town speaks of a monster that once fell from outer space inside a giant meteor, and by visiting the site of impact, we later identify that monster as Kyurem. How is it that the same creature both originated from the division of a greater whole and also arrived on Earth from beyond the celestial vault? In truth, the contradiction is only apparent. I personally have always thought that when the dragon split, it maybe didn't split anywhere other than on Dragon Spiral Tower, and the three pieces shot into space and came back down, maybe causing a great amount of destruction. But on with what Kiskeym says. In that desperate hour, the single dragon Pokemon split its body into a black Pokemon and a white Pokemon, even though ideals and truth don't need to be in opposition. As the story goes, a third dragon, Pokemon Kyurem, also came into existence in that era. Another direct quote exemplifying what Kiskeym states, behind Lakanosa Town, there's a mighty big hole. Have you heard about the giant chasm? A long time ago. The giant chasm was created when a big meteorite fell from the sky. A really scary Pokemon was hidden inside of that meteorite. As players of Black 2 and White 2 are well familiar with, the DNA splicers, otherwise directly translated as the Gene Wedge, is a legendary artifact that allows Kyurem to absorb either Reshiram or Zekrom inside its body, undergoing the process of absofusion, directly translated as absorb union. Its genetic composition is evidently too unstable to reclaim both and restore the original dragon, as the community usually refers to the entity before the split, but it is important to note how the names of these partial fusions are respectively White Kyurem and Black Kyurem. The boundary Pokemon is the one accepting the other dragons within itself, and both name and dragon ice type remain its own. If the sorry husk takes priority over its far more vigorous siblings, it certainly isn't due to its inner strength, meaning that it can't just absorb them, and because it's stronger than them, it's able to retain its own typing. Then, in that case, its discarded flesh is the original body, holding the original mind, meaning that Kyurem is the original dragon, which technically, yes, it's just the husk, as Masters EX even further hints, voicing the doubts of the fans. Both stories are true in their ambiguity. Kyurem is a leftover of Reshiram and Zekrom's division, and it is also the one that slept inside a meteor long before that division took place. I will note right now that it has been confirmed that in Masters EX, while the events that occur within that game are non-canonical, the developers work closely with the original creators of Pokemon and make sure that nothing stated in those games is not something that would contradict or not be stated within the mainline Pokemon games. Meaning that what is stated lore-wise can be taken as canonical. Now, we have a direct quote stating, apparently that terrifying Pokemon was Kyurem, but according to the myth of Unova, Kyurem is what remains of the body of what used to be a single Pokemon that split into Reshiram and Zekrom. Well, it does contradict the other story, but the story of the giant chasm being created by a meteorite does make sense too. Some of the Pokemon that live in the area are said to be from outer space. It's true that Kyurem can fuse with Zekrom and Reshiram, so there seems to be no doubt that they're related too. I tried asking Kyurem to see if I could learn anything from it, but it seems like it's not too sure where it came from either. What do you think? And when people are asked about Kyurem, we get, I think Zekrom also came from space. It's an interesting one too. Maybe both theories are correct, and maybe that's one way of interpreting it. One popular consensus is that the frozen parts of Kyurem's body are a consequence of its original division, deprived of the warmth of its other selves, but this is probably unsubstantiated. If the legendary Pokemon represents the linchpin for the original dragon's existence, then its defining trait is unlikely to vanish while reaching the pinnacle of its strength. Perhaps even the ice aspect would ultimately be engulfed by dragon, but surely it wouldn't be overruled by neither fire nor electric from its other parts. Indeed, the Pokédex references how Kyurem's body became frozen when its cold energy leaked out, presumably at the split, while confirming that it could generate that energy beforehand, before the split. Its extremely lower temperature, while in this state, serves a double purpose, that of sealing its overwhelming power and of stabilizing its cellular structure. The Dex entry state, it generates a powerful freezing energy inside itself, but its body became frozen when the energy leaked out, and it appears that this Pokemon uses its powers over ice to freeze its own body in order to stabilize its cellular structure. I make the mistake all the time of the fact that it can't control ice and that's why it becomes the way it is, when in fact it's the opposite. Kyurem has incredible power over ice, arguably the strongest powers over ice overall, and that's why it keeps itself alive. Dwelling within it is a power even greater than that of Reshiram and Zekrom, but the extreme cold keeps that power bound. Kyurem's DNA does indeed appear to be unstable, malleable enough for absolution to occur in the first place. The existence of a gene wedge confirms its organic composition, and its most prominent shrine even refers to it as the Dragon Helix, in reference to the DNA's typical structure. Yet, from a biological standpoint, Reshiram and Zekrom are capable of reverting to mineral composition, either at will or as a defense mechanism when highly damaged, assuming the form of the Light Stone and the Dark Stone, respectively. Cut content extends this to Kyurem, data for an unused God Stone, referring to a stone in either its current form or, perhaps more likely, that of the original dragon. In fact, even in the finalized games, Professor Juniper suggests the meteorite who brought the Pokemon on Earth to be something analogous, I struggle with that word, to the Light and Dark Stones. Reshiram's body was destroyed and changed into this stone. It is said to be waiting for the emergence of a hero, its information states. Zekrom's body was destroyed and changed into this stone. It is also said to be waiting for the emergence of a hero. And then, Zekrom and Reshiram was revived from a rock called the Dark Stone or Light Stone. Let's suppose the meteorite from the story and this stone are one and the same. Why was an alien dragon floating in the cosmos in the form it normally assumes to simulate death? At the very least, that tells outer space isn't its natural habitat. Hence, it must have originated on some unknown planet. That it is addressed as a god, even if only internally, only brings it closer to other prominent deities in the pantheon. Similarities between Eternatus and the original dragon are already apparent, but they don't end here. Like the gigantic Pokemon in Galar, we would expect from one of its kind to also bestow to the world its peculiar energy. The 14th movie does introduce the Dragon Force, otherwise known as the Dragon Pulse, as a power imbuing the land of Unova, and particularly tied to the events immediately preceding Kyurem's division, capable of bringing immense prosperity or great disaster based on the intent of the channeler. It is clear that the legendary Pokemon had a role in the formation of these veins of energy. One then should question if this is purely an addition from the movie's screenwriters or if an equivalent can be found in the games, and the latter happens to be the case. In the middle of Unova region, there is the Entrelink, otherwise directly translated to the Enterlink, a mysterious space we can only access through our sea gear and said to be the seat of a secret power. Interacting with the Entry, the Enter tree, at its center, we can draw out its peculiar lymph in the form of pass powers, exit powers, arcane forces that allow us to manipulate the multiple variables in the world, including the amount of experience obtained in battle, the spawn rate of all Pokemon, the money obtained by winning against a trainer, the hatchling rate of an egg, and the growth rate of our Pokemon's friendship by tapping into the dream world. These usually irrational feats become possible, although coming with a price. Now, I will note right now, I did a whole video on Reshiram, Zekrom, the original dragon, the Dream World, and the big DLC final boss that I will not say right now, and how it all relates to each other in its own video that you can check out right there, but we're going to continue with what Kiskeym says. Unlocking a pass power requires that we bestow pass orbs, exit spheres, to the entry, globes of condensed power running through the land of Unova, and that we can gather by fulfilling missions on the planet's behalf. Plant's behalf, not planet's behalf. These tasks require that we access one of the two bridges at the Enterlink's side, where a space-time instability makes the veil between worlds thin and allows us to visit other players' save files to assist them in battle by healing their Pokemon, share with them pass powers, selling them an item or hiding one in their world, or challenge them to the fight. By exploiting this instability and fulfilling the dreams of our parallel selves, the power of the region coalesces in the form of mineral orbs, which in turn reinvigorate the entry and prompts its growth. And the more dreams enter the tree, the more numerous and powerful gifts exit from its trunk. More power goes in, this tree then gives back. It's like how Pokemon always says, you give to nature and nature gives you fruit, gives you rewards. That which is mostly, or at least best exemplified, I would say, in Alola, as they make it as clear as possible. The powers that are given there, then granted to its people through, whether it be technically Z energy, a stronger connection, the fulfillment of literal growth in plants and the fruits that are then given from there, and then so much more. From all this, it is easy to draw a parallel between past powers and other chaotic energies running through different regions. They too tend to crystallize and are channeled through flora, while also bringing space-time distortions to their proximity. Even their functioning, generic as it is, can be assimilated to the film's Dragon Force. But that being the case, we should expect to see a more direct connection between the Enterlink and the original dragon. How appropriate that, as it reaches maturity, the entry assumes the form of a helix, its trunk coiled around itself as that of Pitchira aquatica, commonly known as the money plants for the good fortune a legendary man has allegedly found by selling them. As already established, spiral motifs are associated to Kyurem due to its relation with DNA, and the connection is even more blatant as the entry's two intertwined halves feature black and white barks. Then, past powers are only found in Unova as they are a byproduct of the original dragon. Disruption of space-time is even carried over in Kyurem, much like in the Enterlink bridges, as both confidential documents and mystery dungeon gates to infinity affirm its ability of foresight. There's no more room to doubt that the creature is somehow related to one of the giants. In my eyes, I think of foresight and I think of imagination, I think of dreams. Dreams are the combination of truths and ideals, making something that is not real, something that is an imagination, into a fact. You are able to imagine the future, you're able to imagine the potential outcomes that there could be, and because of this, you are prepared. But because this is the original dragon, because this is the original power, or a great godly power, it is able to take these potential outcomes and turn them into reality, or at least find a way to distort the reality that exists to make the intended, the ideal reality into truth. The exact extent of this relation may be harder to frame. While the Giant of Ice is the obvious candidate, it can't be ignored how the dragon also displayed traits of other elements, then carried over to Reshiram and Zekrom. Both Fire type, Flame type, and Electric type were originally classified as special types. And while many of their moves involve a physical approach, they are indeed energies best susceptible to be molded in raw form. Pokemon in the former category also tend to be particularly fast, which is appropriate for those able to manipulate thunders. Electric attacks can be super effective while traversing a conductive medium like ionized water, and while the armors of Steel-type Pokemon still manage to contain the shock, their materials still react poorly when going to the offensive, much like Electric when used against organisms adapted to high voltage, which is just basically saying, hey, Electric types can hurt Steel types, but Steel types struggle to hurt Electric types. On the contrary, Fire-type Pokemon can raise the temperature to the point of melting both Steel and Ice, all energies against which they also prove to be resistant. The same can be said for Fire itself, barely effective against creatures suited to sustain heat. Water, instead, is its obvious counter, extinguishing the flames before they can grow rampant. Why were these elements present inside the original dragon? Because of the typings that these Pokemon have. Reshiram Fire, Zekrom Electric, Kyurem Ice. Why were all these here if it's just simply supposed to match with the Giant of Ice? One possible explanation would be for the Titan to actually embody all three types in a single body, but that would be a unicum. Moreover, when broken down to their fundamental aspects, fire and electric can be reduced to the transfer of heat and electric charges, both concepts required in a universe well before the rise of chemical bonds. Granted, there is no way to know if the matter brought forth by Dog and Palkia already came with those properties, but if these energies were actualized, brought to reality, at the same time of their physical counterparts, then their giants must have been born in space dust, only second to Kiskeym. Hence, it appears more plausible for the pair to have existed well before the Giant of Ice. Why are Reshiram and Zekrom part of Kyurem then? Perhaps thinking of the original dragon as a full-fledged giant is misleading. If it struck Earth in the form of a stone, then it seems to be implied its body either perished or felt threatened during the conflict. Moreover, the dragon will later prove to be eager to collaborate with Arceus in establishing its covenant with humanity. It became this religious aspect. People did worship the original dragon and continue to worship Kyurem, well, not Kyurem, but rather Reshiram and Zekrom at the very least. Did the rebellious giant have a change of heart, or was its consciousness overwritten? If Dog, Palkia, and Giratina are currently hosting their enemies' corpses, it isn't inconceivable that the alpha Pokemon would also find a purpose for those remnants left without an avatar. In fact, it would be irresponsible to just leave those chaotic relics to wander, with the risk chaos might one day take over their flesh once more. The original dragon, then, may have just been conceived in the aftermath of the conflict as one of God's loyal blades, using the Giant of Ice as a main source of its body, while also incorporating parts of the Giants of Fire and Electric in its new composition, effectively saying that they are creating a new golem from pieces of those giants, and that it was never a giant itself to begin with. If the trio ever interacted in any significant way before this chimera was formed is impossible to determine, as whatever overlap between Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem may be a consequence of their later fusion. If two of them are that primordial, we can't even be sure if they had a proper planet to begin with. At the very least, however, we can say that investigations on the Giant of Ice's homeworld don't show any prominent presence of fire and electric. The original dragon's impact site is located to the north of Lacanosa Town and currently goes under the name of Giant Chasm. The Japanese is a literal transcription of the English giant hole, although Saxon genitive is often omitted when rendering the text in katakana, meaning it can be as equally read as the giant's hole, possessive in that term, in allusion to its nature. In any case, the official translation is certainly fitting for a crater which internal documentation affirms to be inspired by the Chaozhai Tiankang, I hope I said that right, the world's deepest sinkhole, whose name in Chinese reads as Heavenly Pit of the Little Village. Okay, that's kind of sick. I never knew that. I was already smitten with a lot of this, and the fun that this has, and, kind of breaking things down in my head a little bit. But that direct relation is arguably one of the sickest connections, bar none, and I need to keep that in mind for future analyses of my own. Despite the disastrous effects the collision may have initially brought, millennia have since passed, and a whole ecosystem was able to develop around the crater's epicenter. Kiskeym is speaking to my very heart on this one. Trees and tall grasses grew abundantly, shaping a natural maze in which remnants of the impact can still be retrieved. Here, items fallen from above are common, from star pieces and comet shards to moonstones and sunstones. Of course, many Pokemon also populated the area. The fauna at the entrance isn't much remarkable, as it is in continuity with that of or near Route 13. A population of Absol likely gathered around as they sensed Kiskeym lingering in the crater's depths, trying to warn people of its dangers, as the map description also stresses how disasters will surely follow by approaching the place. Things get more interesting while proceeding in the cave, which opens towards the inner forest, where wild species can be divided into two main categories. The first is that of ice-type Pokemon lured by the low temperature of the legendary Pokemon, namely Piloswine, Mamoswine, Vanillish, Vanilluxe, Jinx, Delibird, Dugong, and Sneasel. While we cannot meet any Weavile, a Razorclaw among the trees hints at their sporadic evolution. The presence of Pokemon far more common in the past, like Mamoswine, also suggests the place was cold since well before the split, and the chasm does get completely covered in snow as Kiskeym senses our presence at ground zero. No wonder that here we can also pick up the TM for Ice Beam. The second category consists of Pokemon from outer space. It seems that when the meteor crushed, it also permeated its immediate surroundings of cosmic energy, eventually attracting all sorts of creatures from outside the planet. Some of these are self-evident, like the Lunarian Clefairy and Clefable, as well as Lunatone and Solrock, perhaps all interested in the evolutionary stones related to their celestial bodies. Less evident is the case for Metang and Metagross. Beldum's evolutionary line has no explicit connection to outer space, but its biology alone may raise some eyebrows. I am hoping this gets into the idea that magnets become stronger in the cold, and that's why they're here, so that way they can overcome their magnetic forces and actually connect and evolve. These Pokemon have no blood running through their veins, yet still possess a stomach and a nervous system. Their physiology is peculiar to say the least, but the organic compounds on top of their rough and undefined shape don't seem to point to an artificial origin either. Perhaps then their placement here isn't by chance. Hints to an extraterrestrial birth start to be more prominent as we factor more silent forms of storytelling. Prior to Generation 8, Metang and Metagross were the only Pokemon alongside Clef and Clefable to learn Meteor Mash or Comet Punch. And while this connection was weakened when Lucario was added to the roster, Sword and Shield also allowed the two to learn Cosmic Power through TR, a technique explicitly employing energy from space. Moreover, while both Pokemon can be caught in the giant chasm, Beldum also appears on Alola's Mount Hokulani, a site known for meteor landings, and that similarly attracts swarms of Meteor and Cleffa. Most of their other appearances through the franchise consist of artificial reserves or urban settings, other than their occasional migration on Sinnoh's Route 228. The only exception is Snowslide Slope in the Crown Tundra, which incidentally reveals a second pattern in their distribution. All known natural populations adapted to a cold environment, magnetic powers growing stronger at freezing temperatures. Because the magnetic powers of these Pokemon get stronger in freezing temperatures, Metagross living on snowy mountains are full of energy. Spin-offs further strengthen their connections to both outer space and snowy habitats. Among the locations you can recruit Beldum and Metang in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Red Blue Rescue Team are Solar Cave and Whish Cave, home of the mythical Pokemon Jirachi, other than Frosty Grotto. Pokemon Go also featured Beldum among the encounters of the Enigma Week, among other Pokemon at least feebly connected to outer space. Finally, early development files from Ruby and Sapphire confirm the line was internally labeled as Meteorite Pokemon. The obvious conclusion is that Beldum are life forms made of extraterrestrial biometal, originally arrived on Earth from meteors. Which, okay, I can see that. It's not what I would suggest or immediately assume, but I could see it actually, considering all these other connections that are going on here. It's not also the first time we'd have that, because we also get Pokemon like Registeel, who is not of any metal on Earth, and if that's the case and we have these steel giants, maybe there's some relation there as well. Indeed, the impact crater of the giant chasm is far too large to have been caused by the Soul Godstone, if it's the same size as the other stones. But then why do we not find any large chunks of the meteorite anywhere in sight, considering it landed after mythical times? Perhaps we do. And those are the Metang and Metagross carrying the original dragon in a metallic arc made from their bodies. Again, not what I would have thought, but it would be pretty cool to then assume that this stone, or the original meteor, was the Godstone surrounded by the bodies of Metagross, Metang, and Beldum, strongly fused together before they crashed and exploded into these different pieces, now wanting to recombine with each other into a greater being. Positing a more intimate relation between these Pokemon and the dragon also helps to better frame their anatomy, their evolution consisting in a permanent fusion between two individuals, imperfectly mimicking abso-fusion. If these aliens sprouted from a seed of life, it was undeniably on the planet of the Giant of Ice, with of course understanding that Metagross is the result of two Metang achieving fusion. That would also explain why their bodies have adapted to function in freezing cold, magnetic properties starting to fade past a certain temperature even in real-world physics. But if Beldum are indeed made of metal, infused with spirit from Kyurem's homeworld, then the Giant of Steel must have also been present at some points before or during the inception of its Tree of Life. Solid bedrock was as necessary as souls and water for a new planet to thrive. The last one especially so, as a liquid was required for ice to form. And in this case, steel did the trick. Indeed, this isn't even the only trace of metal we can find in relation to the frozen world. Excluding omnipresent creatures like Audino, Excadrill, and Basculin, the Giant Chasm has one last curious inhabitant. For the longest of times, fans have speculated on the true nature of Ditto. I know I personally believe that Ditto is just a creature in and of itself, and that it often chooses to have a passive life, going near legendary mythical Pokemon and any other place where it doesn't have to deal with humans or conflict. Due to its malleable genetic structure, this mysterious Pokemon has the ability to change its shape in any other living beings through the move Transform, even going as far as mimicking inanimate objects. Because this trait is uniquely shared with the mythical Pokemon Mew, many have tried to draw a connection between the two, imagining Ditto to be failed attempts at recreating the new species Pokemon before Mewtwo's success. This approach, however, misunderstands the rationale between the learned sets. While Ditto can shapeshift because of its instability, Mew can, as it contains the blueprints for all the organisms that descend from it. While the outcome is similar, the causes couldn't be more different. Effectively, Ditto can transform because it has the ability to, in the fact that it needs one more piece of the building block to become stable as another creature. Meanwhile, Mew can access all of its ancient DNA that it holds within it to then evolve on the spot, to then cast these moves that other Pokemon have, as it even transforms into them in its own right if it wants to. A little bit of Ditto's information: it is capable of copying an enemy's genetic code to instantly transform itself into a duplicate of the enemy. It can transform into anything. When it sleeps, it changes into a stone to avoid being attacked. Then, proposers of this theory usually point to many other traits shared between the two, although many of them are circumstantial at best, if not outright untrue. It is, for example, suggested that Mew and Ditto share the same color palette, both in regular and shiny form, but a check of their respective hex codes, my man's just pulled out the hex codes. Artists, if you don't flock to this guy immediately, I don't know what you want from me, shows this to not be the case. Similarly, it is often noticed how their measurements are alike, while only their weight is actually the same. If we were to take these as solid proofs, then Ditto would be more similar to Shellder than Mew. The two do have the same color, weight, and height after all. Finally, it is noted how Ditto can be encountered at the Pokemon Mansion and in Cerulean Cave, two locations deeply related to Mewtwo. While this is true, it is as such exclusively in yellow, and the argument doesn't take into account that the Pokemon is also common in many more areas in Kanto. The simplest explanation to factor those encounters is that scientists from the mansion brought those specimens as study samples, with some eventually following the main experiment as it broke free from the lab, rather than positing this to be somehow involved in their origin. The biggest giveaway that this isn't the case, after all, is that no one even comments on the appearance of a brand new species all over the region for seemingly inexplicable causes, assuming the truths behind their creation would be kept a secret, of course. Yeah, you know what, I never realized that nobody ever cares about Ditto. The only time people are like, oh no, it's a Ditto, is when it's the Ditto 5 in Alola. Otherwise, people are like, oh, yeah, we know Ditto has existed for a real long time. Why should I care? Oh, it's a cool Pokemon. It's rare. But why should I care? The discussion reached its end in 2016 when Game Informer asked Shinichi Masuda on this specific matter. The answer he gave as one of the main developers for the franchise's first installment was clear. There's no intended connection between Mew and Ditto, and he never even heard of the theory up until that moment. The transformed Pokemon is its own individual life form, and that begs the question of how such an oddity came to be. Perhaps we can also look at its in-game distribution to get a clue. Other than the giant chasm, Ditto can also be found at Mount Hokulani, much like Beldum. Moreover, in Hoenn, they are exclusively hidden in the Desert Underpass, a path that was only excavated recently by the Fossil Maniac, and that only had an endemic population of Whismur, presumably sneaking in through some unseen or unknown cracks in the stone walls. Granted, Ditto can also slip in or dig through the ground with the right appearance, and due to their high adaptability, they are more widespread in Kanto, Johto, Galar, and Paldea, but why relegate them to a seemingly inaccessible cave if they are meant to be a recent development? The grotto also highlights a connection with outer space, as it opens on Route 114, a site of frequent meteoric strikes. If the case can be made for Beldum to be an alien, if we assume this to be true, then the same holds for Ditto. Their presence at the giant chasm also highlights their similarities with Kyurem, both having an unstable genetic code inclined to mutation. The only difference is that the legendary Pokemon prevents its structural collapse by freezing its parts, something Ditto isn't capable of doing while in its base form. Development files from Black and White make the connection explicit, as Kyurem's cellular structure is deemed unstable in a similar way to Ditto. The dragon's original design also played more into this concept, parts of its body colored violet and seemingly melting around its lower half. Then there is the broader connection with genes. Remember that Kyurem is deeply associated with the helix of DNA, and you may wonder if nucleic acids didn't first appear on the planet of the Giant of Ice. It is true that Reshiram and Zekrom also have a genetic code on their own, but since it is said to be akin to Kyurem's, this is more likely a result of their original fusion rather than something carried over from their original giants. If it already brought change in the states of matter, then similar changes could be applied to life, and that requires units of inheritance serving as a basis for mutations and then evolution. Ditto perfectly embodies this aspect, an amorphous goo of genetic material capable of manifesting all of its endless diverging paths, something that can literally tap into the power of DNA itself due to it being unstable. The sameness of Reshiram and Kyurem's genes allowed Kyurem to absorb Reshiram. Kyurem can now use the power of both fire and ice, and this is the same thing that can be said when it comes to Zekrom, but with electricity and ice. All this points to Ditto being another lifeform originating on the original Dragon's world. Given its composition, we may even think of them as precursors of Beldum, before they assimilated enough metal to stabilize their genetic code. Since Generation 2, Wild Ditto can carry a metal powder, boosting their, and only their own, defense. Diamond and Pearl introduced a more common variation with the Quick Powder, otherwise known as Speed Powder, ignore the voice crack, working on their speed. But both icons show a sack of fine yet hard sand of Ditto's regular and shiny colors. While not enough to gain the steel type, Ditto appeared to carry metallic dust within their bodies, and cut content only reinforces the idea. During Gold and Silver development, an evolution of Ditto named Animon was planned to be obtained by trading the Pokemon while holding a metal coat. While this was ultimately cut, the idea of tying the Pokemon to metal survived through its signature item. In fact, it may have been planned since the very beginning, as documents from Generation 1 confirm its original name, Metamon, to come from a combination of metal and monster. I had to go get tea because I realized I'm only like a quarter of the way through this document, but continuing, as we've seen, the Giant of Steel was involved in the creation of Kyurem's homeworld, so that its inhabitants show traits akin to metal is to be expected. What is more interesting is that Ditto is still normal type, confirming Arceus' essence was also bestowed upon the planet. More and more, the early stages of the Age of Giants appear like a peaceful era, where the limits of creation through division of chaos were tested with the blessing of all those involved, all adding to the tragedy that will be the Giants' betrayal. After the war, the Tree of Life on the Giant of Ice's planet was likely cut. The fact Beldum and Ditto arrived independently on multiple sites imply the Giant Chasm to not be an isolated event, and if multiple meteors are all falling from a single place, then that place may have been destroyed in its entirety. The freezing ruler was slain, its body parts repurposed into a chimera and locked inside a metal cage until it found a new purpose on Earth. Many of the organisms that once thrived on the cold surface may have been lost to time, never to be seen by human eyes. Even if some were ultimately salvaged and brought to a new home, that was the only possible fate reserved to the failed usurpers and their spawn. At least, the Giant of Ice wasn't alone in its demise. Like in a fairy tale. For the better and the worse, Generation 6 was a turning point in the franchise. From the relatively poor reception of the previous iterations and the efforts made to a full 3D transition, something needed to change, and narrative inevitably got caught in the middle. This goes beyond the simple absence of clear treads fleshing out to the established setting. X and Y introduced Mega Evolution, a temporary transformation in which a Pokemon's hidden energy is released to attain a power beyond regular evolution. While this will set the bar for all successive battle gimmicks, it also lacked substance from the side of storytelling. Not only the true nature of this power wasn't ever fully explained, and technically still isn't, as we kind of understand it to come from Xerneas, but not. It's effectively an overabundance of life energy. That's pretty much all we can really guess at. It's kind of what we know. Not only the true nature of this power wasn't ever fully explained, but it even had conflicting portrayals of its origin in the span of 2 games. As we read, according to Professor Sycamore's research, Mega Evolution releases all of a Pokemon's hidden energy at once. That developers struggle to convey Mega Evolution properly is something we can confirm looking at leaked material. In Sango, the Sango New Evolution related setting, we see how at one point during the development of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, they felt the need to organize all the info on the process in a unified document, addressing the contradictions between the 2 titles, even coming to retcon some unsalvageable notions, like the presence of Mega Evolution in regions other than Kalos. The information featured here, while not strictly canonical, was used as a general guideline to the remake's finalized script, and even reused in some dialogues from Legends ZA. I was wrong! What was this? Hold on, did I mislook? Was this actually written more recently than I thought? I am so sorry, Kiskeym. Oh, I'm so sorry. Anyway, and thus can be treated as a compass to navigate the sea of ambiguous dialogues provided in the games. After broadly defining the term, the document addresses why only certain Pokemon are capable of Mega Evolving. The transformation, developers say, is triggered as a latent evolutionary factor called Mega Factor becomes active. This sequence remains dormant under normal conditions, and its expression, or its reveal, or the use of it, requires an external catalyst, a Mega Stone. Radiations emanated by the stone react with the Pokemon's Mega Factor, different wavelengths matching with different factors, making Mega Stones specific to certain organisms. Moreover, elevated heart rate and secretion of neurotransmitters facilitate the reaction. Neuron activated, body temperature raised. This is effectively just whatever it's called, whatever they do in Demon Slayer when they get the special mark. Which is why the mutation is easier to achieve while in battle and tends to wear off afterwards. Legends ZA later shows the form can still be retained for a short while outside of a fight if energy is properly managed. While Mega Factors are never mentioned in-game, it makes sense that the process involves regulation of genetic expression on some degree. Mega Evolved Pokemon undergo physical changes that are occasionally ascribed to the awakening of sleeping genes, such as for Ampharos, and a colored DNA helix is displayed right after the transformation, even taking physical form with Tatsugiri. This doesn't mean that this is always the case. Artificial Pokemon like Golurk and Magearna are still able to Mega Evolve despite the apparent lack of genetic code, albeit this is because they also have internal limits that can be forcefully removed. In fact, in-game dialogues describe Mega Evolution as a process exclusive to Pokemon unable to evolve any further, making the functioning of Mega Stones in all effects an inversion of that of Eviolite. This mysterious evolutionary lump increases defensive stats in Pokemon that haven't yet reached their evolutionary limit, while Mega Evolution allows them to surpass that boundary to achieve greater strength. Granted, there isn't an exact matching, as Eviolite acts non-specifically, but the implication remains that Pokemon eventually reach a dead end in their evolutionary growth, be it genetic or of another nature. Something that I've also ascribed to is the idea that they reach their limit because their energy is at its most stable. There's no reason for them to achieve a greater form. This form, their final form, is all the power that they can contain, or rather, it is the container that can contain every bit of power they will ever be able to release and store at any given time. Continuing with Kiskeym, and that radiates from certain minerals can interact with the factors at its base. Perhaps that an Eviolite is simply a stone emanating wavelengths receptive to portions adjacent to Mega factors. While the proper Mega Stone is an essential component to trigger Mega Evolution, it isn't the only one. A keystone held by a human is also a vital requirement. Usually these items are carried inside an accessory like the Mega Ring in X and Y, or the Mega Bracelet in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, content indicating its material was supposed to amplify the range of effect of the keystone, although this was later removed from the scenario. In any case, the whole process remains rather obscure. The game is only stating that a bond between a Pokemon and its trainer is necessary without elaborating why. Fortunately, the leaked document helps to better frame the mechanism. It is explained that Mega Stones do not regularly emit radiation sufficient to trigger the transformation. In fact, they only do as such when stimulated by a keystone, fittingly representing the key to unlock them. This is only possible as both stones are charged with life energy, that of the Pokemon for the Mega Stone, and that of the human for the Keystone. It's only when the contained energy surpasses a certain threshold that exchange between the two poles, the Mega Stone and the Keystone, can occur, and Mega Evolution manifests. Since the trainer has to employ their own life force, they can even experience fatigue during the process, something that is canonical within the games and the anime. Human and Pokemon both share their essences to fuel the mutation, their mutual feelings converted into radiation. It is in this sense that a bond between the two is truly required. Also, I will clarify, it is not radiation in the sense of, oh no, here's a stick of plutonium that I'm shoving inside of my Ampharos' mouth. No, it is radiation in the form of just energy in general, an emission of energy that can then be transformed through use. Now that we've understood the mechanism, the only question left concerns the origin of Mega Stones and Keystones, and that isn't an easy one to answer. As anticipated, Generation 6 is inconsistent on this issue. While in X and Y, they are suggested to be evolutionary stones mutated in historical times, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire connects them to outer space. Both Zinnia in her story and Professor Cosmo, as part of his research, came to the conclusion that a relation between Mega Evolution and meteorites exists. The researcher even has 2 tomes on the relativity of meteorites and energies, labeled as Pokemon and Humanity, respectively, paralleling the energy sources of the stones. Masters EX has Maxi affirming meteors contain a latent power that makes them suitable material to turn into Mega Stone or a Keystone, which, if that's the case, now that I think about it, which we know that that's the case, if we try to tie that in, where I think Kiskeym's going with this, is the idea that that life, being in space, could have existed since before even the ultimate weapon was fired. That when it was fired, yes, more life energy went into the world, but that this could also be connected to the life on other planets being broken off and hurtling through space as meteorites to then become a life energy that could be absorbed by Pokemon, which is also why we get things like Deoxys added into the relations. The exact quote states, "Did you know that meteorites contain latent power? Under the right conditions, it's possible to alter the qualities of a meteorite. Yes, even into a megastone or even into a keystone." Yet, the leaked document doesn't choose one interpretation over the other. Megastones and keystones are indeed stated to be meteors infused with Pokemon and human life force outright. Yet the route of mutated evolutionary stones isn't precluded. Instead, it is noted how Sycamore's suggestion should be interpreted in the light of the information delivered in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and that items like Leaf Stones and Fire Stones are fitting substrates for a Mega Stone, as they already regulate the expression of evolutionary factors. They're effectively saying that this is a really good base point this is a really, really good foundation to then imbue more energy into, because it can already affect how a Pokemon evolves. Which I think is exactly what we see once again within the whiteboards in Lysander's lab in Legends ZA. Something we can add is that some of these stones are also extraterrestrial, namely the Moonstone and the Sunstone, and possibly others. From the start, there may be overlaps between the two takes, but if the rock's mineral structure underwent mutations similar to that of meteorites absorbing life energy, as developers put it, then there is only one logical conclusion to solve the conundrum. The latent power in meteorites was also transmitted to the stones on Earth, and that is the true source of Mega Evolution. While spin-offs alluded to this more explicitly even before, Legends ZA finally confirmed the interference. Here, Mega Power, or Mega Energy, is revealed to be the energy at the core of Mega Evolution. Pokemon invested by its radiation, triggering the transformation even in absence of an external catalyst, effectively rogue Mega Evolution. In areas particularly permeated with Mega Power, Keystones and Megastones could also be powered up by it, allowing the form change to last as long as the propeller doesn't run out. Effectively, as long as it's got the gas, it ain't gonna turn off. In other words, instead of relying on human and Pokemon life force reworked on the basis of the meteoric latent power, that foundation is used directly. In these cases, the Mega Ring can even be recharged simply standing in proximity of a Pokemon using a move. Previously absorbed power exuding during the fight. Yeah, every single time you attack or a Pokemon gets hit, your charged power goes up. High concentrations of Mega Power can result in its sedimentation, or rather it effectively filling out, being left behind, and building up. Energy, main matter, these Mega Crystals can be broken down into smaller shards, releasing their hidden power. The composition of these pink crystals is said to be similar to that of Megastones, which indeed can even form spontaneously in an area with exceeding Mega Power, bypassing the meteorite aspect entirely. Mega Shards can also be used to craft a Mega Stone for a specific Pokemon, as seen with Side Mission 190, and just by going to Corsairco for that matter. Then, both Meteorites and Evolutionary Stones are simply mediums to which Mega Power manages to effectively attach. They are a physical object that is imbued with power to then transform into something that can grant that energy to a living being. But that begs the question of why it is found in outer space of all places. I'm still going to say now it's probably because of whatever latent life energy was shot into the atmosphere or into space thanks to the ultimate weapon, but we also only get to see it arc maybe a couple, I don't know, 100, maybe 1,000 kilometers from the surface of the atmosphere, quote-unquote surface, so it doesn't explain how meteorites from beyond Earth's reach would then have this energy within it, which is where I think Kiskeym's going with this. Anastar City's most prominent landmark is its sundial. This mysterious device can synchronize with our Mega Ring after its keystone has been imbued with the power of either Xerneas and Yveltal, both legendary Pokemon retaining a large quantity of life energy. After this initial reaction, Megastones hidden in all Kalos will start to shine at the time sunlight is reflected into the sundial. And this is exactly why I'm a little sad that the Anastar Sundial was not talked about in Legends ZA whatsoever. I think somebody might have briefly mentioned it, and I think it was in the museum. It was, but that's one of my only gripes with ZA story-wise, in terms of like what it could have built on. Continuing with Kiskeym, retroactively speaking, it is clear that this is a Mega Crystal of gargantuan proportions, sharing with its lesser counterparts the same pink hue and a similar relation with Mega Power. In fact, Sycamore states that the way the artifact works is comparable to a Mega Ring, in the sense that it converts normal sunlight into specific wavelengths before reacting with Mega Stones. This is the same way human energy is filtered inside a keystone to trigger the radiation on the receiving end, the only difference being that it uses the sun as its main fuel. Going by those standards, we understand that Pokemon do heat up when they do reach that Mega Evolution with a large amount of energy released, and so it's almost like saying it's solar energy, not solar voltaic. And I'm going to explain that with my nature nerd science that I have. It's like solar energy is sunlight heating up the object, that heat is then turned into energy. Meanwhile, solar voltaic is turning that direct light into energy, which is what plants do. In this case, It is literally just doing sunlight into heat, heat into energy, energy into transformation for Mega Energy and Mega Evolutions. Then you could say our Mega Ring acted more as a Mega Stone in the Sundial's presence, being charged with the life force of the legendary Pokemon, as it started to align with its peculiar light as if a key granted access to a previously unlocked pathway. From that point onward, Sundial and Mega Ring are intrinsically linked, and when the crystal reflects light in Anastar, so the Mega Ring or Mega Evolved Ring temporarily mutates, increasing the radius of the Keystone's effect on the surroundings, which lights up Mega Stones normally beyond sight. Point is, the map description of Anastar City also states the Sundial came from outer space. Regardless of later developments in Kalos' history, this affirms Mega power to have an extraterrestrial origin. In both regions, it is most prominently featured. And if a piece so large eventually fell on Earth, it means there are corners of the universe where its concertation far exceeds what is seen in Legends ZA. The ultimate source of Mega Evolution undeniably comes from outside this planet, which, if we went by old scrapped lore, which people believe to be true, is that fairy-type Pokemon were supposed to all originate from space in their entirety, with Xerneas and Yveltal being the exact same. And if that was the case, and Xerneas did was from outer space as it originally was supposed to be, then yeah, that would also be true and line up with this. At this point, it comes naturally to notice the recurring patterns. Much like past powers, this is also an arcane form of energy from outer space. Much like past powers, it also tends to crystallize if in high densities. Similarly, flora shows to be reactive to its presence, even if not in the form of a tree. Eternal flowers are a plant that died out in ancient times, only a very limited number surviving to these days. Being wielded by AZ's Floette, it is easy to misinterpret the flower's properties as a consequence of the Pokemon being invested by a large quantity of Mega power at a precise point in its life. However, the plant was used as a catalyst for Light of Ruin before those developments. Even the move's description states the power to cast this beam of light is drawn from the flower, the same that is able to absorb all Mega power for itself when the Pokemon tries to Mega Evolve. After all, the attack is pink in color, much like the corresponding crystals and other moves meant to replicate similar mechanisms. Then, Eternal Flowers have developed the ability to harness Mega power, much like the Entry did for Kyurem's Dragon Force. To support this, the following quotes just kinda help. This rare Floette holds a plant that died down in ancient times. The Pokemon is said to harbor an incredible power. The Eternal Flower has absorbed all the energy from Mega Evolution, and now attacks enemies on its own. Drawing power from the Eternal Flower, the user fires a powerful beam of light. This also damages the user terribly. Then, there are alterations of space-time. Just like past powers allowed travels between different worlds by tearing the veil between them, so Zinnia asserts Mega Evolution carries distortions in the world. This is why she hypothesizes the link cable developed by the Devon Corporation in the attempt to warp a meteorite far away could, in theory, teleport it to another reality, as the device mimics the energy of Mega Evolution. In a way, this is the highest expression of what happens at a Pokemon's transformation, such as Metagross and Tatsugiri even duplicating large portions of their bodies seemingly out of thin air. Direct quote, "From generation to generation we pass along the lore about the distortions in the world born by the Mega Evolution mechanism, and about the existence of another world, which we have long observed to be just like this one, and yet not the same. And our current plan involves using the infinity energy within our rocket, combined with the life energy of humans found in Keystones. We will start off by artificially replicating the massive energy that is triggered at the time of Mega Evolution. Followed by, Team Aqua stole the control device for the link cable that our company had been developing. It's a special tool called the Dimensional Shifter." I missed all of this when it comes to figuring out lore and how Mega Evolution works, and this is kind of mind-blowing. Finally, Legends ZA introduces the concept of Rogue Mega Evolution, taking the role of boss encounters. Pokemon caught into a swell of Mega power are capable of Mega Evolving on their own, bypassing the Mega Stone and Keystone requirements, which one stone will appear after the fight, as if the corresponding energy precipitates into a solid. Basically, after you defeat it, all that energy escapes and then becomes that solid orb. As the power isn't shared between the Pokemon and its trainer, the process causes excessive pain to the Pokemon. Many Pokedex entries highlight how Mega Evolution as a whole can be harmful for the Pokemon. For example, Scizor's body starts to melt after a long period in this form, but the effects seem at least to be considerably eased in a controlled environment. Rogue Mega Evolutions are pure expressions of Mega power, and their frenzied state earned them their name. Partially, this phenomenon also shows distorting properties, teleporting the player in a secluded arena limited by a purple aura, but it also reveals another trait common to chaotic energies, gigantism. Rogue Mega Pokemon enlarge their bodies to unnatural proportions, considerably increasing their health points in battle. While we do not see this with Pass Power, this is only because the original Dragon's essence never interacts with Pokemon directly, but the same will be carried over on different degrees in all other battle gimmicks. By this point, it is clear that Mega Power shares too many traits with other energies of Giants to not be tied with one of them too. Much like the meteorite that formed the giant chasm in Unova, the Sundial and Anastar also brought its piece of chaos into the world. Whether its nature is simply that of an independent crystal or a piece of a giant's body, the absence of its god of power makes it more difficult to infer the nature of its original attribute. What was it meant to do? Where did it originally come from? Who held that power? Was it Xerneas or something greater? Was Xerneas or is Xerneas just an avatar, much like many of our other god Pokemon? One good candidate, however, is simply the Fairy typing. Not only would it make sense for Generation 6 to focus on the type it firstly introduced, but moves related to Mega Power usually fall under this category. That is the case for Light and Ruin, but also just gonna pick myself back up. But also the signature attacks of Deontay and Magearna, two mythical Pokemon which are tied to Mega Evolution from their very origin. The two also share pink as their most prominent color. Moreover, a connection may even explain why humans are less perceptive when identifying the Fairy type in universes where Mega Evolution went undiscovered. While this remains speculation until more concrete proofs emerge, that the Giant of Fairy is also the origin of Mega Evolution makes sense on a thematic level as well. Fairies are folklore creatures usually associated with nature and magic, and that is coherently portrayed in the typing. While its introduction succeeds the abandonment of the physical special split, Fairy would have, in all likelihood, fallen into the special category, having the lowest attack physical on average among all attributes, while specializing in special attack and special defense for many of their Pokemon. Many of its moves are tied to the power of nature and the land, as seen with Flora Healing, Flower Shield, Geomancy, Nature's Madness, while Pokemon tied to sweets, baked food, and perfumes also tend to be classified as Fairy. Junichi Masuda also confirmed that the reason why the type is weak to steel and their attacks aren't very effective against it is due to fairies usually being frail to metals in folklore. It literally burns them if you touch them with it. Similarly, Fairy type moves may deal less damage to fire, as flames easily burn their floral environments. That Fairy was once embodied by a giant shows its properties to be a primordial aspect of creation, and so that the blueprint for supernatural Fae may have in some way influenced the rules of the early universe. At the same time, Mega Evolution is particularly reactive to life force and the energy of nature, as seen time and time again with its mechanism in X and Y and its involvement in the history of Hoenn. The reason may be that the one ruling over Mega Power was also one with the natural world, one that was very strongly intertwined with the natural world, while also adding an otherwise magical twist to it. The Giant of Fairy is undeniably the one fitting the most. In a sense, its role is complementary to Q-Rounds. I think at this point, I just need to try and figure out how to draw other, like, Regis for this, because I'm kind of obsessing over the whole idea of seeing all these different giants in my mind, but not seeing them as, like, the little Regis, but seeing them as, like, Regigigas in different forms. Anywho, while the Giant of Ice embodied change, regulating the flow of evolution through genetic mutations, Mega Power tampers with its proper course by forcefully removing its limits, painting rainbow over DNA Pokemon under its influence free themselves from their design's shackles to achieve a form otherwise unreachable. Among the others, Metagross can attain Mega Evolution, meaning the limiter was imposed on Pokemon from Kyurem's planet as much as on those on Earth. The same could also be said for other alien organisms. It seems then to be a constant through all known life forms, that there is or has to be a limit to their bodies. There has to be a point in which an equilibrium is reached. Perhaps the Giant of Fairy at some point visited the frozen world and grew interested in the genetic materials built on its surface, or perhaps its birth and involvement are from a later period of the Age of Giants. Either the genetic material was already created and the fairy decided that it wanted to change things or impose a limit or remove the limit, or it happened even later on. Be it as it may, its complete disappearance from the records is suspicious, especially if compared to its cousins. No legendary Pokemon currently took over its remnants, which may indicate its body had been completely dismantled after the war. One capable of surpassing the world's limits, after all, is an opponent you don't want to deal with in the first place. Arceus may have decided that disposing of it in its entirety was the best course of action. I mean, yeah, if you have an entire war between gods and you want to try and win that fight, you have the God of Wrath, effectively being Giratina, winning the fight for you until eventually this other dude just walks in and is like, hey, I'm a shonen protagonist. Let me just completely remove your limiters. Let me give you Super Saiyan 5 and go blast them now. That God of Wrath means nothing if it can't achieve the unlocked state of power. Yeah, that makes sense. Still, Mega Power lurks somewhere in space. Perhaps a fraction of its former self still slumbers somewhere deep in the cosmos, waiting for the right moment to strike. We may never know. Howdy there. Editing acrylic without the lab coat, without anything, wearing normal people clothes. I decided to split this into two parts. One, because of the fact that it's such a long video, 3-hour video. It's a lot to listen to, and I've recognized that, especially as the most recent Gallery Ecology just did not do as well. Also, because I realized that it's very stressful to edit a 3-hour video, get it out within a week, and not neglect food, water, time with my pets and my fiance and so much more. So just as a quick note, this is getting split, if you haven't noticed, because of the title, or maybe not the title, depends on how I title it, into two separate parts. I might make a thumbnail for the second one separate from this one, just for the funsies, and who knows. With that though, get ready for that second part. I might release it in the middle of the week, might release it the following week. We'll find out. It all depends on what I'm doing. I do want to say thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy, please make sure that you subscribe, share it with others. Please make sure you do go to Medium and actually check out Kiskeym, because he is a fantastic individual that I feel very, very lucky to be able to read his stuff and bring it to a larger audience. And I hope that you guys leave a comment talking about what your thoughts are, how you feel about it, so on and so forth. Because I think more than myself wanting a comment, I think Kiskeym deserves that level of recognition and other people having those thoughts or sharing their thoughts regarding his work and his articles that he has created. If you'd like to go the extra mile, please do become a member of the channel for as little as $3 a month. You get behind the scenes info, you get to see my ramblings, you get to see a number of other things that I want to start doing now that I'll be able to make time for things like the Patreon a little bit better in specific. It makes a massive difference, especially if YouTube just isn't pushing out videos, which I've kind of noticed it's kind of doing again, or if any other weird stuff begins to happen. So it means the world if you do go that far, and it means the world just for you watching. So without wasting any more time, thank you so much for watching, and as always, don't do anything I wouldn't do, don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!